The dominator of the universe, the Japanese celestial, Sae Itoshi. One of the most hyped up characters in the show. In fact, I think he is second only to Noah, which is actually funny because the writer has hyped them so much that their mere presence or even their name is enough to hype up any situation. And in fact, the writer used this specifically. With Noah, he hyped up all the master strikers, especially Snuffy and Loki. And of course with Sae, we've seen the writer use him to hype up Kaiser and later Bunny. However, given the fact that the last time we've seen Sae play was actually back in the U20 game, which was like 150 chapters ago, and after all the shit we've seen in the Neo Egoist League, I think it is only natural for us to try and deduct how strong is this motherfucker. And so that's exactly what I am going today. We are going to look at Sae's stats, his weapons, abilities, and his best feats in order to determine where does he stand among all the U20 players. And also, there is another reason for why I want to do this, because in his last two matchups, I have seen a lot of people telling me that I am glazing him way too much. And honestly, my answer for that is, I'm not the one glazing him, it's actually the writer. You see, throughout the Neo Egoist League, every time we've seen an insane midfielder pull off an amazing feat, for the most part, I thought that we've seen this before, and then I immediately remember Sae and how he used the same technique or weapon back in the U20 game without us actually knowing, because back then the Blue Lockers did not really know what hit them, and so they could not even understand what Sae was doing. However, as they advanced throughout the Neo Egoist League, they started to get a grasp of how crazy this dude was. And with me saying this, let's actually dissect how strong is Sae Itoshi. Now obviously I am going to start with the weapons that we've seen him use before, and then we will move to the speculative weapons that I think he definitely has, but they never got confirmed, and finally we will rank him among the other U20 players. Maybe not a direct one-on-one against each player, but I will be doing tiers and I will put Sae in the fitting tier. And obviously the easiest way to start this is by talking about his physicality. And here I gotta say that much like his brother Rin, Sae has a very well-rounded physicality. I still think that Rin is slightly stronger, but Sae is definitely not that far off. They are still very strong jacks of all trades. However, while this matters a lot for Rin, especially with his craziness in the berserker state, does it actually matter that much for Sae? Well, here I actually have two schools of thoughts. The first one is that of course it does, and the second, not really. Now for the second school of thought, the reason I think it doesn't matter that much is actually because Sae is very technical and he doesn't need his physicality that much. I feel like it is kinda the same with Charles. He doesn't use physicality that much. The only two times we've seen him have physical feats were actually both special cases. The first one was obviously against Rin, where they were evenly matched. However, judging by the fact that Sae could easily dribble past him at that point, I don't think Sae needed to engage him physically, he just wanted to. Then the second time was actually when he snatched the ball from Nagi and Hayate. And obviously this is a jump-in feat, however it is more of a metavision feat more than it is a jump-in feat, because I really do not think that he could beat Nagi in the air. And as such, he simply took him by surprise. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is still a very impressive feat, however it's not like Sae needs his jump-in ability that much. The first school of thought, however, where I think Sae needs to be balanced like this, is actually all due to the fact that he is an attacking midfielder, and actually being well-rounded for that role is great for any striker, because the latter could focus on his craft, trusting that the midfielder would understand him and then later having no physical issue to match the striker. But enough jabbering about his physicality, let's actually move to the more interesting stuff, his abilities and weapons. Now obviously, because he is an attacking midfielder, let's start with his passing ability. Now, from what we've seen in the U20 game, Sae has one of the most versatile passing abilities in the show. As I said before in many of my videos, second only to Charles. However, that's not all. You see, this madman has such an insane level of accuracy, it's not even funny. And that's the second weapon that we definitely know he has. You see, his feat with Chigiri and Shidou still blows my mind. The guy only noticed Chigiri after the latter starts sprinting, and then in a moment's notice he changed his pass to one that is actually very fitting for Shidou, but at the same time impossible for Chigiri. And here I can't really keep on talking about this because I will be entering the speculative side of things. And by the way, I'm not speculating on just one weapon here, I am actually thinking of two. In any case, however, beyond accuracy and beyond versatility, we've seen Sae deliver some of the strongest passes in the show. And honestly, with the exception to Ness's final pass and the Kaiser Impact Magnus, there isn't any U20 player that we've seen him deliver stronger passes than Sae. The latter even scared Sendo with how powerful his passes are. In fact, when talking about Sendo, this is yet another speculative weapon that we will actually get to in a second. First, and carry on with Sendo, let's talk about Sae actually tailoring his passes for the strikers. You see, even though the U20 strikers excluding Shidou were complete shit, Sae still managed to meet them in their most optimal spot. And when they actually showed spark, Sae was immediately jumping on the occasion to give them very strong passes. And this is a very important weapon for any attacking midfielder, as understanding your striker goes a long way in delivering the most perfect passes. And what's funny, the only player that I think comes even close to Sae in this regard is actually Ness. Even Charles, whom we've seen tailor his passes for the likes of Shidou and Rin, does not reach the level of Ness and Sae in this point specifically. Ness especially was tailoring his passes for whatever Kaiser was thinking. However, I think Sae is still more impressive because he was doing it with shit strikers like Sendo and the rest of the U20 players. In any case, however, with this weapon, I am actually done with the confirmed Sae passing abilities. And next, I want to talk a little bit about his shooting, which I know he is no Kaiser, Baro or Rin in the Berserker state, but he still showed an insane shooting ability. The guy can shoot better than 80% of the strikers, yet he is simply a midfielder. In any case, however, let's shift gears and talk about weapons that are on the technical side. The first of which is his reflexes. We've seen Sae being able to sniff any opportunity that would lead to a goal, which subsequently meant that he was always a step ahead of everyone else on the pitch, with the exception of course being Shidou, who was matching him through his instincts. But that's actually not all. You see, his reflexes sure were sharp, but also his off-the-ball movements were even sharper. The guy seemed to be everywhere and he was always following the ball wherever it went. And honestly, I can't talk about these two weapons without diving into Metavision, which is a mixture between a weapon that we've seen but was not confirmed, but at the same time it got confirmed by Isagi much later. And so I feel like it's the perfect transition from talking about the weapons that we actually know he has into the weapons that we will be speculating about. Now, when it comes to Sae and his Metavision, unfortunately he was using it against fodder at that time. All of the blue lockers and their might, none of them was able to see what Sae was seeing, with the exception of course being Shidou. But honestly, this doesn't tell you a lot, because as I said, to Sae those were fodders back then. Judging him against current Isagi, Kaiser, Charles and Karasu would be more fun. However, what metric can we use to actually figure out where does his Metavision stand? Well, I actually have three metrics. The first one, which I think is completely wrong, is actually about comparing him to Isagi in the Manshine City game. I think that's not the case whatsoever. The second one is actually comparing him to Shidou. You see, Sae was not the only player who was far ahead of everyone else when it comes to field readability. Shidou was matching him no problem. In fact, the guy was having fun while doing so. And recently we actually knew the extent of Shidou's instincts. You see, because throughout Blue Lock, we've never seen anyone beat Shidou's instincts. Sure, they could beat him physically or beat him with acrobatic like Rin did, but when it comes to being there, when the situation is the most dangerous, no one ever really beat Shidou. We've seen him on the same level as Kaiser at the end of the PXG game, which by definition puts Sae's Metavision at least on that level, because back in the U20 game, it seemed that both Sae and Shidou were on the same page. However, let's actually take it further and talk about the third theory, which would probably cause you guys to call me a glazer to Sae, but I don't really care. I am going to say it, and I am going to say it the way I see it. You see, the only way Isagi was able to beat Shidou was thanks to Kunigami. That was until he unlocked the fastest piece, which for the first time gave Isagi an edge over Shidou. Sure, you could say that he beat him in the third selection, but Shidou was there. It was not as if he was left behind, he just did not expect Isagi being there, especially after his performance throughout the game. However, in the PXG game, Isagi was definitely faster to react than Shidou. And of course, that was not because he reacted, but rather due to the fastest piece, he predicted what was going to happen. But hold on, how does all of this relate to Sae? You see, the fastest piece only came to fruition after Isagi completely rid himself of any emotions. because before, due to his admiration for Rin, Kaiser and Noah, Isagi could not see the full picture, and only after taking everything at face value, Isagi was able to deduct the fastest piece. And I want to say something small here. You see, the fastest piece fits with the protagonist's feeling, and Isagi should have unlocked it way back then. However, he didn't because mentally he was not prepared to think that far, and he only did that after he got betrayed by Noah and came back through the wall of evolution. And all of this relates to Sae because if we look at him, he is the same as Isagi when it comes to mentality. What they do is that they are completely emotionless on the field and only think of how they could achieve their goals. That's why their thinking could not be clearer, and I feel like if Sae has the same mentality, I think he should have a metavision on Isagi's level post Noah's betrayal. I'm not talking about metavision with the fastest piece, as I don't really think that Sae has the fastest piece, but rather just the emotionless metavision. What we actually should consider regarding his ocular abilities is none other than the sniper eyes. First introduced by Charles back in chapter 252, this ocular ability allows the user to snipe the best route from where he can deliver his passes. Not only that, but much like its counterparts the Predator eyes, they could be used to figure out a narrow space from where the midfielder could deliver his passes. And at first I didn't really think much of it. However, after seeing Charles play a little bit more, I actually think Sae also have these eyes. You see, the way he switched his pass the moment he saw Chiguru's sprints all but remind me of the Predator eyes, because the moment any opening occurs, the Predator eyes could snipe that opportunity, and the same could be said about the sniper eyes. And honestly, this is the strongest theory for Sae's speculative weapons, due to the way Sae changed his pass. He did not stray from Shidou's vision, but rather he just adjusted it a little bit so Chiguru could not reach it. But as I said before, it was not the only speculative weapon that happened in that moment. You see, the second ability that Sae used is actually the other half of his ability to read his strikers. You see, Sae not only can he read his strikers and deliver the perfect pass for them, he can also read the defenders and deliver passes that are completely out of their reach, yet at the same time perfect for the strikers. And we've seen him use this times and times again. As I said, he used it against Chiguru, but also he used it against Ryo by completely taking advantage of Shidou's abilities, while crippling Ryo, who was a little bit late to react. And speaking of the Demon Freak, let's talk about another weapon that Sae used in tandem with Shidou, which is the Reflex meets Reflex that we've seen from Hiyori and Isagi at the end of the Uber's game, but also throughout the PXG game. You see, this is an insane weapon, and honestly it could be considered as the strongest duo weapon, where both the striker and midfielder meet in the most optimal spot, completely ignoring each other and working for their crafts. Then the midfielder delivers a perfect pass and the striker turns it into a goal, a complete weapon that is akin to telepathy. However, the NEL was not the first time we've seen this weapon, because we clearly see it with Shidou and Sae in the U20 game. The latter was feeding him passes that no any other player could react to unless they possess either insane instincts like Shidou or metavision like Isagi and Ryo later. However, and speaking of delivering insane passes to Shidou, another ability that Sae has, which is regarded as a chimera of his three most powerful weapons. You see, when delivering a pass, Sae doesn't just take your strengths as they are. He actually takes your potential into consideration, and he employs passes that would push you to reach that potential. He did it with the U20 strikers who are complete shit, but more impressively he did it with Shidou, completely pushing the latter into scoring his best goal. And honestly, this is the brilliance of Blue Lock. This weapon specifically is considered the strongest passing ability in the entirety of the NEL. It is the strongest midfielder feat in the NEL, performed oddly enough by Ness, because it exceeds everything that Charles and Hiyori did, and it reaches a new height to the weapons they've been using before. You see, while Charles and Hiyori could use the Reflex meets Reflex, we've seen Ness do it here. However, instead of just giving it to the perfect position for Kaiser, he actually pushed the latter to evolve. And had Kaiser been a cool-headed player like Isagi, he would definitely reach a new level and score that goal. And mind you, this feat was insane, it almost was unreactable to. Shidou and Ren stood there as Isagi met the ball. all. It was not just a telepathy weapon, it also delved a lot into psychology, potential, and future. However, think about it this way. The strongest passing feat in the entirety of the Neo-Egoist League was something that Sae was dishing out randomly. However, I think that's all. I believe these are all the speculative weapons that Sae might have. In fact, for the majority of them, I know Sae has them. It just hasn't been confirmed. In any case, however, having speculated on Sae's true level, where would he actually stand? Well, first let's figure out the tiers. Let's actually put players on tiers. And I'm not going to make tiers for all the players, I am just going to include the top players. Now, the first tier, I actually have only 4 players. Isagi, Ren, Kaiser, and Lorenzo. These are the new Gen 11 level. And I know what you might say, where is Bunny? Well, we are going to get to in a second. The second tier, which I would dub the ones knocking on the door of the new Gen 11, which are Baru and Shidou of course, then Bachira, and finally I think Charles might fit in this tier. Then the third tier includes the likes of Karasu, Aiko, Ryo, Hiyori, and Ness. And from there, the other tiers don't really matter because Sae obviously is not in them. In fact, I think it is pretty obvious. Sae is definitely in the first tier. However, I am going to take it a little bit further. When it comes to being the overall best player, Sae is slightly better than Isagi, Kaiser, Rin, and Lorenzo. And I gotta say this, when I mention he is slightly better, it's not honestly by a huge margin. He is better, sure, but they could catch up to him at any point. However, if that's the case, and Sae is actually the best in the first tier, where does Bunny actually stand? I actually think he is better. I wouldn't say it is by a huge margin, but it is enough for me not to include him in the first tier, and actually put him in tier 0 with Loki. These two are the only U20 players that are actually playing with the pros and are actually dominating. I mean, for God's sake, Bunny is playing on the same playing field as Lavinio, and for that reason, I think he is better than Sae and deserves to be a tier higher, which again, I would love to make a video on how strong Bunny will be, but that's for you guys to decide. If you wanna see it, please let me know in the comments. However, with us actually ranking Sae, that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video and enjoyed this little analysis on Sae, but until next time, thank you for watching.